to our weekly book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my bookworm co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. So this week we will be continuing our discussion of The Danish Way of Raising Teens by Ibn Dissing Sandal, whose name we're pretty much convinced we're pronouncing wrong. And if you do not have teens, it's not actually about teens. It's any child who's going through developmental and psychological changes, which is pretty much every kid. So yeah, welcome. We're glad you're here. It's going to be awesome.
Right, totally. And honestly, she talks often about how the earlier you start these strategies or techniques, the better they'll work, which I think we can probably pretty much all agree on. But, start these things with your younger kids and you'll have better success with true teenagers. So truly don't worry about the title excluding you, right? Join in. Also, just because this is a book club, that does not mean that you have to buy or even read the book or listen to the book or read the cover of the book, right? If you are happy tuning in and hearing our recap and takeaways and discussion, that totally works. We aren't here to grade your comprehension. We don't give participation grades or gold stars. We just hope you get something useful out of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, some of the books, when we pick the books for book club, we've never read them. It's not like we're sharing our favorites with you. Sometimes we don't even like the book and we'll be like, yeah, this might not be one you want to buy, right? So don't feel bad, If you do decide that you like the book, we have a link in our podcast description where you can find the book on Amazon. Full disclosure, it is an Amazon affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use our link, but it does support the energy and effort that we put into our podcast and the costs associated with, our hosting site and all that good kind of stuff. So we always appreciate your support in advance. So thank you for shopping through our link.
I know. I think we're up to like $6.85. Soon we're going to get enough that they'll actually send us a check. That'll be exciting.
My goodness. It's exciting. I know. Split 50-50. We are rocking that.
There are lots of things in life that they say you don't do it to make money, but you really don't podcast to make money. There's no money in just podcasting.
Talking.
Right? Like, there's no, you have to have tens of thousands of listeners to be able to make anything substantial on any of the the sites. And, and the vast majority of people who make money by saying they're podcasters, they're actually selling those courses. You've seen them. They're everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Come listen to my podcast while I try to convince you to take my finance course or my this or my that. And we're not doing that. So we're not rolling in it, but we hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
Hope you actually get something from
We're
it,
having
right?
fun. So hopefully you are too, right?
Exactly.
I love podcasting. We're doing great. It's like a harebrained idea and we actually pulled it off. So I'm like, hey, that's a win right there.
I'll do that. Megan's like, here's the link. Can you buy all this stuff? I'm like, oh, you mean this week? Okay.
Oh, we meant that. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And here we are. Yeah. So today we will be discussing chapters 5 and 6. So let's dive in. I'm positive I'm going to screw up the title for this one too. So chapter 5 is called Formation. And there's a lot of discussion about Danish. Here we go. Danish efterskoles.
I think that's efterskoles. Yeah, probably. That's probably about right.
We'll go with that. I'll make sure that when the episode gets published that the closed captioning has it correct, and then you can Google it. If you want to Google it, you'll know what the word is. So we'll make sure that it's spelled properly for you. So Amanda, I have questions about efterskoles. I feel like she describes it at tremendous length and yet doesn't describe it enough that I still understand. What on earth? It's optional, but it's not it's optional and it's not free. But do you live there? Is it school? Is it not school? They say they're grading stuff. What are they grading? I have no idea what's happening here.
So let me start by reading a couple quotes. Then I think we need to talk about a bigger discussion around Danish schooling. Okay. So the quotes that I had are, first, she's got a book that says the word efterskole, or however you pronounce it, literally translates to, quote, after school in English, but is often used in reference to an independent boarding school, which isn't quite right. So again, it means this, but it isn't. Yeah. The Danish English dictionaries offer continuation school, which is also a misleading description of the efterskole's purpose and form. Therefore, I will use efterskole or efterschools, the plural, for this special Danish place for teenagers to join. Also on that same page, we're on page 99, she also has, quote, unique Danish independent residential schools for students between 14 and 18 years old. And she says 40% of all Danish students attend for 1, 2, or 3 years. So apparently you have to be between the ages of 14 and 18. It is residential.
Yeah.
I read somewhere like the prices vary. It's not free, but she said like an average of 16,000 a year. You're right. She does talk about it like grading and teachers and like actually having classes to attend. I think my guess, and I did not do research on this, I really should have instead of staying up late reading a werewolf book. But I think what it probably comes down to is that, in the US, we have globally kind of a unique education system where we have this expectation where all kids go to like a regular school through 18. And then after 18, you can go to a technical school or to college but like we expect all kids to finish through the like 18 is that kind of idea. And in a lot of other like European countries, especially, there's this idea that you might only go, to 14 and then you differentiate. Like if you're planning to go to trade school, you go to a different kind of next level of schooling versus the kids who are planning to go to university. They're not actually at university yet, but there's like a different kind of band of schooling there for those
Like a
teen
prep.
years. Yeah. And so I'm guessing that that's probably what it comes down to is maybe this idea that, and you can use this residential school instead of your like local public school for some of those years, but it also doesn't count as like your college, but it can prepare you for going to university. It doesn't count as your technical schooling, but it can prepare you to go into technical schooling. Yeah. I think, for me, the thing that really stood out is I feel like a lot of what university does for American students is what these after schools do for Danish students. And we definitely have a difference of opinion on how important university or college is for all kids. For me, I feel like generally speaking, pretty much all kids should go to college or university because it's a great transition period for like being exposed to other kids outside of just your neighborhood, a gentle introduction to the real world where like you can still fail in some pretty epic ways, but you're supported and you're in college and it's okay because you're only in college, right? You weren't out in the real world failing and like, like it's just a different like I feel like college provides this transition that's pretty essential for
Right.
most human beings that are moving from like living at home as a teen into adulthood. And I don't think we have a great alternative. And it's unfortunate that college and university is so incredibly expensive.
Right.
It's definitely more than just 16,000 a year
Yeah.
for a residential school. So yeah, that was kind of my takeaway from it. What have you got?
I think I like the concept. I mean, I mentioned in our first episode, this is our third episode on this book, right? And I mentioned in the first one, like when I'm reading it and going, that's weird, that's weird, that's weird. Like I'm like, no, we're reading this because it's different, right? Like and so I keep having to do that. I just felt like the way she wrote about it could have been clearer. That was my kind of big thing because like on the top of 101, she writes this whole thing about, it's a place to laugh and cry and rejoice and be challenged. And it's full of togetherness and free play and wisdom and like all this stuff. And then the next paragraph, and that's only a fraction of it, right? And then the next paragraph starts with, it sounds like a utopia, but of course it isn't. And I'm like, but you just did that thing, right? And so it was like, there was a lot of like, it's this, but it's not. And it's this, but it's different. And I was like, then what is it? Like, I needed like, okay, so in our last book, which was the beginner's guide to homeschooling or whatever it was called, I forget it, right? Homeschool starter guide or whatever. She had like sample calendars of what like a day and a week and a month looked like. I needed that for the after school. Like, what exactly are you doing at this place? What does your life look like? Who's in charge?
Yeah, like a daily schedule and like a weekly schedule would have been really helpful to understand what we were talking about.
Yeah, like the people that are there, like, is there like life coaching involved? Like, what is happening at this place that you're doing all day? And how are you developing into this utopic person that she kind of describes? at this place? Like, what is it that's being done there that makes it so special? Because she just kind
Mm.
of talks about the benefits of it, but doesn't really give us any of the specifics of how they accomplish those things. And so I like literally on like 106, I have a note that was like, is this a school? Is it a commune? Like, what's happening here? Like, I'm not really,
Mm.
I mean, I'm down for a good commune experience. I'm not judging. Like, if that's what it is, that's fine. But like, I was
Mhm.
like, hey, but just trying to figure out what it was. I was so confused. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I would, my understanding of it, right, is this idea of kind of boarding school, but not, because you have, it's not, well, but like the American take on
I
boarding
get
school,
it.
it's quite expensive, right?
Right.
And you would not necessarily, you're not necessarily self-selecting, but you are self-selecting a group of also very wealthy, you know, people who have the
Gift,
same life
potentially
experience, and
gifted. Yeah.
yeah, in a place, whereas this seems kind of boarding school but without that, because it's more affordable, and it's something that brings, they try really hard to bring a wide mix of people together, right? And so you have more exposure and diversity. It sounded kind of like camp, right? Like some sort of a camp that goes for a year or two. And I mean, I know, like, when I was a teenager, going away to summer camp was always kind of like a life-changing experience for me,
Yeah.
because you met people totally different place, and different, even just from a different town, like their take on things and their experiences. And um I mean, it was like really eye-opening and transformative, and that idea of really being away from your parents, and not not being able to just call them up and have them fix something for you, you having to sort of struggle through it and figure it out on your own. It's big, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big deal in development for teens, I think, but it does seem like it's like the really, really long version of summer camp.
I know genuinely, it sounds like something my oldest would probably really quite enjoy. Like he loves that kind of environment and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, from what I can vaguely gather about how this actually works, it sounds interesting. I thought that
Hmm.
it was pretty cool. So I did like the comment that she made on 103, where it's kind of like smack in the middle of the page, where she says, but in a world where children are made into small adults early, with little space to play and where everything else must preferably be measurable and evaluated, experiences and memories are much more important than this, in my opinion. And so she's saying these after schools create that free space to do that. And I thought it really is so true. Like, I know I feel like in the public school system, kids are being pushed really, really hard to achieve more adult things, but then at the same time not being treated like adults because they can't pee without asking permission, right? So it's like this really strange dichotomy. But I feel like in the homeschooling world, I see sometimes like a pushback against like dual enrollment, even in like early college, like why are we rushing these kids, right? For what it's worth, all my kids were in early college. Like, I'm not opposed to it in any way, shape, or form. If you choose not to do it early, that's okay. It'll still be there when they turn 18, right? Like, it's totally fine. So I'm not particularly opposed to it, but it did kind of make me stop and think, like, oh, like, is there, like, what is the rush, right? I know for my kids, it was this yearning for that level of information, that's what they wanted. It wasn't to push them out into the world or anything like that. But maybe if that is the drive between certain parenting decisions, like I was kind of thinking through my decisions and like, at what point did I push them to mature faster than maybe they needed to? And so that kind of gave me pause a little bit right there. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I do think that pushing kids to be more mature, and we see it even if the parents aren't doing it, the impacts, the societal pressure, every time we go out, right? Winston is in 5th grade, and that's that really interesting age, right? Where like you go and you see other kids who are generally like 4th to 6th grade, and some of them are acting like teenagers, and they're
Mhm.
worried about their makeup and their dressing, and and doing things that I'm like, well, I'm not sure that my mom would have allowed that even at 15 or 16,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then and then you have the others that are still, they've got their stuffies, and they're all in on that. And so it is a really interesting age range to think about, like, how much are we pushing kids into being early adults and pushing them to mature?
Mm-hmm.
And then to your point, in homeschooling, you do especially see that there's that pushback about the dual enrollment. I see it quite often, and people try to say, well, why are you pushing your kids? But I think that part of that difference for a lot of parents, probably not all, but for a lot, is that we aren't sending them to college campuses. There's that small group that are doing early admission or, going to college at 12 and 13 and 14 and like going onto a college campus and actually living that experience like a young Sheldon kind of nonsense or something. But for the most part, that's not what we're doing, right? We're trying to access more challenging information,
Right.
but still keep them at home in that home environment and not pushing them out into the real grown-up world or pushing them into that transition from being a kid at home to being an adult on their own. All that much faster, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, it just kind of made me pause. Like sometimes I think I would keep that with me after we've read this book and start and go, they don't need that right now, or maybe weigh the pros and cons with them differently than I might have previously. Like just give it thought from time to time and like kind of pause and be like, am I pushing? Because there really is. I noted something. Okay, so Amanda and I keep a group spreadsheet between us, right? Where we, it's the biggest spreadsheet in the world at this point. It started out really small, but I put a book down the other day. I think I put it on our, hold on, I'm just looking at it, on our potential to be read list. Nope, apparently I didn't. Oh man, it was some book about, I'm looking at the full list. I don't think I did. I probably saved it in my camera roll, took a screenshot, and then forgot to move it over. But it was something about like the goal-driven society and the like we're running a perpetual sprint, and like the way that we're kind of raising kids in this environment. And it kind of reminded me of that. Now it's going to drive me crazy that I can't think of the name of the book, but I'll have to find it and look it up because I saw it and I was like, oh, you know what it was? I saw it and the title grabbed my attention, and then the subtitle gave me the impression that it was very school focused, that it was, but the title itself, when it initially grabbed my attention, was like, yeah, we are kind of doing that thing as a society as a whole, right? Where it's like more, faster, harder, more, like we're all trying to get to this finish line that we're like, what even is the finish line? Like, what is it? But then, yeah, that was it. When I looked at it, I was like, oh, it's very schooly,
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, I'm going to keep that with me. I'm like tucking it away in my little mental pocket.
So my next comment was on page 105. We start a new section that's formation, which was the title of the chapter. So I was a little confused about that. But again, kind of defines what she means by formation, but then also doesn't really. So a couple quotes that might be helpful in your understanding of what she's talking about. She says, formation most often refers to being an educated and insightful human who with sufficient autonomy will lead himself and others towards being able to make valuable and wise decisions. Sorry, that was not well read, but hopefully you followed. So yeah, this idea like formation is to learn self-direction and to know oneself. So teens aren't always looking to others for what to do or for the answer. I mean, okay, like I'm not really sure that anyone is like, no, teens shouldn't learn
do that thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, I mean, I think that's, and maybe she's just trying to lay the groundwork for what she goes on to talk about. So like on the next page, the next section is after schools, which we still aren't 100% sure what those are, through parents' lenses. But for me, the first quote in this section is, quote, why are Danish parents willing to let go of their teenagers at such a sensitive time? Shouldn't we keep our teenagers close to make sure they don't rebel? What if they get influenced negatively by someone with values different from theirs or none at all? And I was like, well, I mean, I could be off here, but I'm pretty sure that like the closer you hold them, the tighter
the more
you
they
hold
rebel.
them. Yeah, right. The more they like, that seems like a pretty universal understanding of teenage years, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's like, a household where, alcohol was completely taboo for whatever reason. And, they go to college, like the first week they're getting their stomach pumped, or something because it was like the floodgate finally opened. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that as well. And then, like, what if they get influenced negatively by someone with values different from theirs? It kind of reminds me of, like, we talk about it sometimes, that Shiny Happy People documentary. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can never come into contact with anybody who has a different belief system than we do. That is way too dangerous. You might think, you might discover
Mm-hmm.
something different, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's okay. Like, if you have a strong foundation that you've put into place, I feel like it'll be okay. If you have an open line of communication with your teens, it should be okay. All of that. So it
Well,
didn't
yeah,
seem like a
and the thing
frightening
is,
thing to me.
I think if they're gonna come in, if they're gonna experience that and dabble with that, like high school is probably the time you want that to happen for the most part, right? Like you're still there, you still have this great support system, like in place right there, hands on, to be able to help with any of the fallout that may come from a series of bad choices because your frontal lobe isn't where it should be yet, right? Like if you make those choices in your mid to late 20s, like you probably aren't living with people who are like right there ready to help you out of this mess. It's a lot harder to be like, so I made a really bad choice and I know you can't see all of the effects of it, but then things are kind of like imploding. Could you come help me clean that up? Like that's a lot harder to do versus when you're 16 and still living at home and your family's like, oh boy.
Yeah.
let's come
Well,
together and try to work through this.
and the reality is, you would think, okay, so given the Danish school system, which does rank very, very well throughout the world as far as school systems are concerned, and we talked about it in our episode about kindergarten, where I think it was in the Danish system, it could have been in the German system, but a lot of them are quite similar. Where like in kindergarten, it's not just one teacher with a group of kids. There's a kindergarten, there's a teacher in there, there's an aide, there's a therapist, there's a counselor, like there's this whole team of people, right? So if they're doing that in their gen ed programs that everybody is getting for free, imagine the support structure that's built into these after schools and the counseling and the leadership and the mentorship and the guidance that's probably available to these kids, life coaching and support and guidance and things like that. I mean, I'm assuming it's baked into this process given what we've learned so far about the Danish system.
Yeah, it would seem so.
Right? So I liked the examples on 109 about what formation is, but do you want to talk about the Danish Welfare Society first, Amanda?
So the quote says, the Danish Welfare Society is something that many Danes take for granted, but it defines Denmark. Blah, 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 lots of words. Welfare has been a continued contributor to Denmark being one of Europe's and one of the world's most equal societies. And I just kind of felt like, so you slip that in there in the middle of the book in like a pullout thing about like raising like happy, healthy kids. I think like one might argue that like box is like really all you needed to put in the entire book.
Yeah.
Like
that having a safety net in life gives you the security to feel peaceful and to know that things are good. I mean, imagine living in a society where fundamentally you just know that you are not one medical disaster away from bankruptcy or from losing your home. Like imagine that peace of mind. I'd be pretty fucking happy, let me tell you. Right?
Yeah.
Like
Obviously we did not live in Denmark, but we lived in Belgium for multiple years. And that idea of, like, I need massage therapy. Like, okay, no problem. You can go twice a week. Like I need this. I need a specialist OBGYN. Okay, no problem. Like, here you go. And it's free, and that doctor says, I want you to have, every time you come in for an appointment, which is way more often than you would ever get in the United States, I want you to have an ultrasound because we want to keep track of the baby. Like, okay, well, how much is that going to cost me? Like, obviously it's not going to cost you anything. Like,
right.
I'm the doctor and this is what I want to monitor your pregnancy correctly. Like, okay, I don't really understand how that works, but if you say it's going to be fine and it's not going to cost me a fortune, like I'm in, and yeah, I do think that there's a lot to be said for knowing that you're being protected beyond just what you can do for yourself, right? Like, yeah, that
Exactly.
social safety net.
Yeah. I mean, we're in the process of moving, which we've talked about in the episodes, and I had run an estate sale and whatever, and I just kind of had some stuff left over. So we have one of those local buy nothing groups, and I posted,
Mhm.
and the first lady who came, super nice, and we end up chatting and whatever. So I end up finding through conversation that and I had put in the post, you can resell it. I don't care. Because in our buy nothing group, a lot of people will say, like, no resellers. If you want to
Mhm.
resell it, I don't care. Like, I just need it out of my house. We're leaving in like 2 weeks. I just need it done. Right. So she shows up and yes, she's like, yes, I resell it. Thank you so much. Blah, blah, blah. She's side hustle paying for her brain tumor. And I'm like, this is the society we live in, is that she's taking my old toaster to sell on Facebook Marketplace to pay for her brain tumor. And I'm like, this is the downfall of society, right? Like, this is
Yeah.
just, it's a disaster, right? And so the fact that the Danes don't live in that world, I think makes a huge difference in their happiness level. Hello, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But as it relates to formation, I did like on page 109 and 110, because I agree at the beginning of this section where she defined it, it super wasn't clear, right? So
Hmm.
she gave some examples of formation. This I found clearer. So it said, formation is not only something that appears in a year at after school, it grows through everyday practices in the family and where your individual footprints are set. Formation occurs in ways small and big when talking about the day and reflecting on your own or others' behavior. When reading books that give historical perspective and cultural dimensions. When teaching your teen to distinguish between reality and fantasy. When educating them in online ethics and behavior. Hold on, flip page. Okay. When you teach them not to believe everything they read, that there are first-hand descriptions, second-hand, third-hand, etc. When you show care and consideration, openness and generosity. When you are kind to strangers and help without expecting anything in return. When you trust your teens and back up their dreams. When you let them recognize themselves and endeavor to make your shared relationship respectful and loving. Formation is both conscious and unconscious, but you can focus on it if you want your teens to develop into self-thinking individuals who will risk standing up for themselves in a healthy and sustainable way in this diverse and sometimes uncertain world. So I felt like that was a better description of what she means by the process of formation. I'm still missing the how on earth you do all of that, right? Like, I mean, I get it was like when you read books, et cetera, and like all that kind of, I get that, but it was like, that's a lot, right? Like, so how is that all culminating? How is that congealing into like this amazingly happy thing? I guess it's just having that outlook and being present and doing those things and having those conversations and just really making it a priority.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, I read that and I just thought, and again, it's coming from a place of real privilege, right? I thought, who isn't trying to achieve this in their parenting? Like, who's out there raising their kid thinking, like, I hope I'm not helping them understand the difference between these things. I hope I'm sending them out into the real world completely unprepared for how to tell the difference between truth and fiction. I mean, like, I don't, a- and to your point, like, well, I think many parents are trying to do all of these things, trying to help their teen with all of these things. So
What
where's
are
the
you doing
extra
different?
piece?
Right.
Yeah, where's the
Yeah.
extra piece that's made you so happy?
Yeah. What's happening in Denmark that makes this amazing? Like
Yeah.
that's the part where I'm like, I get what you're saying, but okay. But
Hmm.
again, okay, so I love it when this happens because we totally don't plan this, right? But in our episode this week, we talked about respecting your kids and how your parenting style is the foundation for your homeschooling. And if your parenting relationship with your children and your parenting style is not firm, is a little rocky, whatever you layer on top of that might not be terribly successful, right? So it's kind of the same thing, right? This concept of you have this amazing social structure that's in place. So everything that you layer on top of that is going to work so much better. We might be doing the exact same things that they're doing in this formation stage, but we're layering it on top of a society where everybody is stressed, everybody's overscheduled, everybody's, especially right now, the economy is bad. People are stressed about economy. There's a lot of job loss going on. So you're layering it on top of a giant pile of shit right now. And so it's like, yeah, we're both doing the same thing, but you're layering yours on like a really solid foundation and we're not. And so that ultimate thing still probably comes back to the foundation. which is the Danish welfare culture, right? Or the
Yeah.
structure that exists in the Danish welfare society. And when we say welfare, FYI, they use welfare in a different term, though. It's become like a dirty word here and a very judgmental, obnoxious
Yeah.
thing. That's just their society. For the welfare of their people, they have programs in place. We do not.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then they had this guy. I thought this was really interesting. They had this guy. His name was Mr. O Yeon Ho from South Korea, him and a bunch of people went to Denmark and studied Danish society and this, that, and the other thing to try to replicate this concept in South Korea, where he is. And he speaks all over the world and does all this stuff. It was pretty interesting. But I liked the thing on 113, like some of his kind of bubbled up observations about Danish culture and parenting and education were that these kids had a unique level of freedom of choice that made them independent regardless of their parents or the existing order of society, that all children are allowed to participate even if they are not great or best in class, and that students with excellent grades are not the only ones who have a presence, that there's an atmosphere that allows you to love yourself for who you are and your uniqueness, etc. So I thought that was interesting. Like somebody from the outside kind of went in and thoroughly studied it. It was like, these are my high level points of this situation. So I thought it was okay.
Yeah, I completely blew that whole section off because I also lived in South Korea. This whole book episode is going to be about like, well, when I lived in this place, but I lived in South Korea, right, as an English teacher. And I taught at an English language academy, and I taught executives at a major corporation. And in my free time, I volunteered at an orphanage. And for me, I was just like, for the most part, this idea goes so against Korean culture and Asian culture in general. And while I do think it's great that someone is, working to maybe change the tide a little or, to do these kinds of things, like, great. So he opened a free school, like in a country, like that's like saying, well, we opened a free school in Massachusetts. So hold on to your hats because the whole tide's changing in the United States.
American education is in for a big shakeup. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean,
I agree with that completely. I just thought his thoughts were interesting from the perspective of like an outside, like, because we're looking at it being like, what are they doing in Denmark that makes this so amazing, right? The fact that he went in from the outside a bunch of times. He'd been there like 23 times or something, I think it said. And like those were some of the things that he noticed that I was like, oh, okay. Because like I think in homeschooling, we obviously can design our own worlds, but like his note about freedom of choice that makes children independent. Like I don't feel like in America kids have a ton of freedom of choice, especially if they're in traditional school, right? But then also just depending on parenting style and stuff like that, it's not a super freedom of choice environment, I don't think, on the whole. Of course, there are plenty of examples, but on the whole. So I thought it was interesting that from the outside, he was like, these are kind of the things that I think are the big movers and shakers in the system as far as philosophy is concerned.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
My personal experience would say that the United States is probably somewhere in the middle between South Korea and Denmark when it comes to like freedom of choice for students and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, we have a mutual friend who's American but lived in Japan for a really long time. And when we would hear from her about like the Japanese education system and stuff like that too, you're just like, or like I have a friend who used to teach for VIP Kid, which was the ESL program that was super popular in China before they changed the regulations and all that, And she would talk about the fact like the kids would be in class, 5 a.m. their time, 11 p.m. they'd be falling asleep in class. They were so exhausted, And so, yeah, that's definitely not what we're doing in America. So I would agree that we're kind of middle of the road, but compared to Denmark, I feel like we've got a little room we could make up there. That would be pretty nice.
Yeah, no, there's definitely room for improvement. Yeah. Okay, so before we move on to chapter 6, we just want to take a quick moment to say it's an election year. You know that. There's no way you don't know that. But the election is coming up, and we would just really like to encourage you to double check your voter status, your voter registration status. If it's past that time, we're so sorry. I know some states, it's already coming up. Check your status, look up your polling place. They change. Polling places often change year to year. Double check where you're supposed to actually go. Make a plan to vote, right? It's really important. And, you can probably guess where we stand on all of it. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that everyone should go make their voice heard, make a plan to
Oh,
vote, and go do it.
our voting numbers in this country are abysmal, right?
It
Like
is.
the
It's
fact that
so
people are
bad.
still dying around the world for the right to vote and have a say in their lives and their country. And people here just don't bother turning up. It's just like they had that after the vice presidential debate. They had one of those room full of undecided people, which I don't understand how you could be undecided at this point. But anyway, they were there. And this one person was like, I just may not vote at all. And I'm like, how the hell did you get on MSNBC or whatever channel I would say? Like that you're just like, I might not even vote. Like, I'm like, dude, you couldn't have found better people for this undecided room here,
Well, those are the only people they could get to say, I'm undecided.
Exactly. Gee, I can't tell between drinking, a cup of lemonade or a cup of toxic feces, like, gee, I'm not really sure what the choice is. What do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, our move has been timed around voting, right? Like early voting here starts the 21st. So that was like a standard. Like we will not leave the state of South Carolina, and we're moving out 2 days after because I was like, we will vote and then we will leave, because you'll be shocked to know that in the very red state of South Carolina, they make it nearly impossible to get an absentee ballot for yourself. So, because there was a chance my husband wasn't going to be in the country, and I was like, oh, I'll get you an absentee ballot. No, I won't. Nope, not going to happen. We didn't.
I hate that. I hate that. We already have our ballots, right? Like we have our ballots, they're sitting in our kitchen table, and it's like we need to, find the time to sit down. We get a huge booklet. They call it like a pamphlet, but it's a book of like over 100 pages that has like all of the propositions,
the amendments,
the for and against, and a lot of the people who are running for your specific area and like their candidate statement and who has endorsed them. And then you can go do extra research, of course. But, like we need to take the time to sit down and go through all of it. And, in our house, we do a little bit of collaborative voting. Obviously, your vote is your vote and you don't have to share it with anyone, because we have mail-in ballots that we use. A lot of times it'll be like, oh, I did all of the research on this and, like I support it because of this. And then like, oh, okay, like, yeah, that's what I would want to, like, or like in a nutshell, this yes means this and no means that. I like,
right.
Okay, like.
Well, especially because those propositions, they tend to write with so many double negatives and stuff that you can't think. You're like,
yes means no.
Right. Like, you're like, I know I want hungry school kids to have lunch, but which box do I check if I want hungry school kids to have lunch? Because they write it in a way that's so freaking confusing,
Yes.
I know.
Yes, so true.
I go online. So my husband is not political at all. And he's lived in the States as an adult, but he's not from here and whatever. And so I always just go online, like when we lived in North Carolina or whatever, I'll go on like Wake County Democrats, whatever. And they always have like a downloadable ballot. And I literally just print it. I'm like, replicate these bubbles, because he's not going to research and and all that stuff. And I'm like, do not screw this up, and so he just shows up and votes for whoever I tell him to, but yeah, I'm like, otherwise you got to read those things so carefully, because they write them so tricky, it's just not nice. It's not okay.
No, it's not. It's not. And, it is one of those things, like it really is a barrier to voting, right? Reading comprehension has to be really high to be able to do a lot of those kinds of things. Luckily, if you're confused by it and you don't get great resources like we do here in the state of California, I would absolutely, you can look up any party, any group. Like for me personally, a lot of times I'll look up, Women's League of Voters for the county that I live in, and they'll give you their position. And then I might look up, our county Democrats as well. And I might even look up, maybe the county libertarian or whatever, just like one other one that I wouldn't necessarily vote with, but just to see what they're saying on it or where they stand on it, to give me an idea of like, I'm for sure want to go this way or whatever.
Okay, just like you said that, and I was like, you could also go to another website and look at it and just do the exact opposite.
There is that too. Like,
he's telling me to do. Okay, I'll do that. That's no then.
That would be a no.
Shut that off.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right.
All right.
Chapter 6, we've got togetherness and grasping the social language. And I didn't really have a ton of notes from this chapter, because it all seemed kind of like it was either words that talked in circles or things that just automatically made sense, and like friends make you happier. Okay, great. Like I was like, I'm okay with that, I highlighted the same quote on 117 though.
Yeah. So it says, quote, adolescence is about the natural transition that occurs from being family centered to becoming friend or me centered. And I was like, I don't necessarily know if I believe it's that cut and dry.
Yeah.
I don't have I mean, I have adolescence. It's such a weird, we talked about that before in some other episode. It's such a weird word, right? I
To
have a
define it,
preteen,
yeah.
I have a tween kiddo. So we haven't had that transition, but I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been the case for me, but I will say there have been extenuating circumstances, right? Like my earliest kids became teens during the pandemic. So obviously their shift to friends didn't really happen, right? Because
Mhm.
they were home. And then right at the end of the pandemic, for us, I should say for us, when we felt comfortable branching back out into the world and when things started opening back up and when things started running on a typical cadence again, we were kind of excited to like get out there and make some friends and do all that. And then my husband got transferred. So we moved here. And so it's like they've just had some disruptions where they haven't really been able to like root themselves. I'm actually super excited because we're doing that homeschool pop-up that I had mentioned, the world schooling pop-up in Poland next month. Yeah.
Mhm.
So confused about what day it is and what time it is. I'm like in a daze. But yeah, it's next month. And I'm really, really hoping that they are able to kind of gel with some of the teens who were there because there's a Facebook specific group for the event and you can get a feel for who's going to be there and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I'm just really hoping that even if it's just a handful of kids that they hit it off with, and maybe those kids are like, hey, we're also doing the one in Prague in May. Are you going to come? I'd be like, yes, yes. If you have made connections with these people and you're going to stay on Discord or WhatsApp with these, yes. Like I would love for them to kind of form those connections. It's been a little bit tough between the pandemic and moving and the fact that we live in a super Bible-y area. It's been a little tough. So, I mean, and I think, yeah, it's been tough. So I haven't noticed that, but I almost would like it a little bit more. Like I'd feel really happy if they kind of transition to like having more of those kinds of bonds and connections. So I'll keep you posted. Maybe Poland will be magical and I'll find out.
Maybe.
Okay. I know I looked up how you pronounce this word
Oh my God, I'm so bad.
and then I forgot
Listen,
it.
no, I'm so bad at pronouncing things.
Okay, here, pronunciation. Hold on. Huga. Okay, there we go. So I remember there was a store. I can't remember if it was Target or IKEA. Somebody had like a thing at one point where it was like they had like a Huga line. It's spelled Hygge. We'll make sure that it's correct in the closed captioning, right? But she talks about this a lot in this chapter, so I felt like maybe we should tell you what the definition is according to the author. It says Huga, which P.S. If you look at that word and then know that it's pronounced Huga, it just tells you how wrong we've been pronouncing everything else because it doesn't look anything
Yeah,
like
that's
that, right?
it.
Anyway, Huga has a unique invisible energy that is rooted in a shared desire to be together, like a state of mind where you feel connected, filled with closeness and shared values, all combined into a more prominent feeling of togetherness. So, I mean, there's just a lot in this chapter about, I really have very little highlights. Like, there's a lot about, like, friends being good for your mental health and yada, yada, yada. Like, I don't know, there wasn't a lot for me.
Yeah. I'm going to just back up to the Huga thing.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot. I have recommended the History Quest history curriculum for like elementary and early middle school. I wouldn't go much past 6th or 7th grade with it. But it has units, sections that are Huga units, and it's kind of in the middle, and it's like a week of not exactly a research project because they also have research project weeks. It's more like get a longer book, like a good chapter book, and the idea that you like snuggle up together, you cuddle in together and do some just reading about something. Whereas each week has book suggestions, but they're usually more like picture books or like quick reading things. And then the Huga, is that how you pronounced it? Jeez, that is not how I would like. I don't know. I've been saying it wrong for years in my own head, even though it always says like, this is how you pronounce it at the beginning, right? And then you automatically start pronouncing
That's
it your
what
own way.
Google told me. So Google might be wrong. But I'll follow Google down that rabbit hole. I'm good.
But yeah, that idea of, like cuddling in, and it's very popular in the Nordic Scandinavian countries, right? There's like Iceland has a holiday that's all about giving books to each other where you're going to like sit down and cuddle up with a good book and a warm cup of something and spend that time, just calmly reading and connecting and all of that. I love that.
Yeah. What could be
Yeah, I mean,
wrong with
she
that?
talks about a lot in here and how they have a cabin. It sounds like almost like a cabin in the woods that they get away to disconnect and connect. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll take one of those, right? Instead of paying a small fortune for an Airbnb up on the mountain.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we both have the same, again, like on page 120, she says, she's got a quote. It says, quote, "Make some friends. Why is that hard for you? Suck it up and do like the others. She ignores you. What don't you get?" End quote. And she's using examples of things parents would say and then goes on to explain why they shouldn't say them. And I was just kind of like, I don't
Right.
know who's actually talking to their kids like this.
People, they are. Okay, I was walking into Target one day. I got so upset. This was when I lived in Texas, so it's got to be at least 2 years ago. I'm walking into Target. There's this mom walking in. She's got this little kid, maybe like 3 or 4, and she's holding her hand in the parking lot. And she goes like, "Don't ask me for anything, because I can tell you right now, you ain't getting nothing." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that was like her precursor to the shopping adventure.
Yeah.
Was like, "Don't ask me for stuff." And I was like, "Oh shit." Like I was so upset for this little kid
Mm.
because it was this little girl. And I was like, I mean, I know we kind of like talked about the extinguishing of stars in the first chapter and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, you just like extinguished all of that kid's stars. Like, what the heck? Like, why would you talk to a kid like I can't. Like, I know we all have bad days and people judge us on our worst day. And maybe she's an awesome mom on the other days, but I just didn't get that vibe from the way she spoke to her kid. Like
Yeah.
that was coming across as like the typical way that she heads into Target, like, and I was just like, oof. So people they talk to their kids that way. I hear it in the store and I'm just like, ugh. And I want to like hug the kids at the same time. And it's bad. It's really ugly. Yeah, I mean, I put down. I'm in a group, a Facebook group here in town, and for moms over 40, and they do fun stuff. They go to like friends trivia night at bars and stuff like that, and whatever. They just try to get together. But the number of posts that get put in that group they kind of look like singles ads from like the like if you like pina coladas, like that kind of singles ad. And it's like that, but it's like, hi, I'm like 43, my kids are this age, like I work in tech and, I love reading smut and watching true crime and I'm just really looking for friends, like, and like there's so many people, they cannot find friends as adults, people who transplant, it's a move or whatever. And it's really hard. So like if it's hard for grown ass women to make friends, how are we expecting it to be easy for these kids? I think when they're little and they just run up to like another one on the playground and like hit them and go like, tag, you're it. And then they run away. It's like, oh, boom, friends. Like, but I think like for some kids, that's much easier when they're younger. But I think for teens, even for the ones that were comfortable doing it when they were younger, it probably gets a little bit harder to do as teens. And so I'm like, I think we just need to acknowledge that and kind of help them wherever we can.
Yeah.
Like maybe not whole chapter worthy for me. So.
Right. Yeah, there is that. And so you had alluded to it earlier, but on page 123, she says, she's got a quote that says, "A strong social network is one of the most significant factors in your overall happiness." And I'm the researcher in me was like, I want
Right.
receipts, like what does a strong social network mean? What are the other, it's one of the most significant factors. So what are the other significant factors? And
Exactly.
how are we, like, what is overall happiness? Like, how are we defining that? That said, I was like, well, I mean, I suppose I guess I can see that, I mean, but I want to know all the other factors that, like, I feel like that should be an entire book in and of itself. Like,
Right.
it's one of, and this, once again, like a nebulous idea, a strong social network. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, she's got some receipts in the back. So it might be back there. Not a lot, but And then from page 125 to 127, I'm curious what you thought about this. So she tells this story, a rather long story, about her daughter dealing with and struggling with bullying at school. And so there's like a little bit of a mean girl situation going on, and her daughter's like trying to stand up for herself and be her authentic self, and it's not going over very well. And the author is talking about how she's being like pretty hands off with it and trying to remember that, you know, her daughter is this brilliant, beautiful person, and she's, you know, coming into her own, just being hands off, but a supportive listening ear at home. And then she kind of wraps it up by saying basically, you know, I felt sore and down, thinking there's nothing I can do to change the way the world is, even though we tried everything possible to change this specific situation. And I was like,
But you
really?
just said you were hands off. Yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, first off, you were hands off. Second off, there was no mention of like homeschooling or any sort of alternative education besides sending her to the residential school with all the other kids that, you know, like from her public school. Like, do you want to go to residential? And she didn't want to go to residential school. Yeah, I was just like, I don't know. I don't know about that. And then, you know, like her whole thing, you know, of like, well, it's just the way the world is. And I hear that a lot, right? Especially like that we could have done an entire homeschooling backlash segment on just that idea of like, well, if they don't get bullied in middle school, how will they be ready for the real
Right.
world? And I'm like, I don't know. I think that middle school and early high school, like the bullying that happens at those times is unlike anything you experience anywhere else at
Yeah.
any other time in your life, right? Like that's a unique time frame when the bullying is just like at a whole other level. And
Yeah.
do my thing was like, I'm not sure that we need to leave kids in those situations. Like, I'm not
No.
sure that we need to have this, like, well, you've got to go through this awful thing at a really, you know, fundamental, foundational time in your development so that you never experience it again as an adult, but you're ready for it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no. I mean, to answer your question, I took almost nothing out. I literally highlighted nothing because I just read it and my eyes glazed over and I was just like, I can't with this. Like, it's just, even though I'm trying very hard to be open-minded about a different culture and a different way of parenting and all of that, I was just like, I'm not seeing where this is going or how this is helpful. And I didn't find it by the end. So yeah, I have nothing constructive to add to that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, like I got nothing. I mean, yeah, I can't. But I agree with you on the bullying thing. If your kid's being bullied, pull them from school. Like there's nothing, it's ridiculous. That is not a reason to educate, to leave your kids in public education or any brick and mortar education, right? Any group set up, any sport, any
setting,
yeah.
Anywhere that there's that kind of bullying.
Yeah.
If you, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't make the first step to just be like, oh, there's bullying, we're going to yank you, you know, but like if the other adults that are involved don't see this as a problem, like that's a whole toxic environment that you just don't need to be a part of. Like, thank you very much. I'm opting out of this like toxic cesspool of acceptance of like, just no, you know, like just no.
I mean, our bullying culture in America has gotten so bad that we have kids, young kids unaliving themselves over bullying. Like seriously, and we're thinking this is productive to helping you as an adult somehow. Like what on earth? What kind of messed up logic is that? It's not, it doesn't work.
No.
All right. I just thought it was cute because it reminded me of our podcast. So on page 128, she has a thing where she talks about the former Danish member of parliament who used to have dialogue coffee meetings where she would meet with people who disagreed with her and have mutually respectful conversations. And the point wasn't to like change the other person's mind or anything like that. It was just to like see where you could also find common ground. And I was like we lack that so much in our world today as far as like so many things. And I was like, to us, that was kind of from the beginning of our podcast. Like that was one of our things was like, you know, we homeschool differently and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, but your kid rocks. I'm pretty happy my kids are rocking, you know, like it's all good, even though we do things differently. So anyway, I just thought that was like a nice little, like heartfelt, this is like a little hallmark moment for me in the book there. I liked it.
Winston's been making all of these like wire things, and I've gotten quite a few hearts made out of copper wire lately. You need like a little copper wire heart to put on there.
Yeah,
Around that
exactly. I
part of
do.
it.
I know. I like
Um,
it. So we
all
both
right.
noted this love language thing here.
Yeah. So well, actually, just to back up for a quick second, on page 129, she
Oh,
talks about the
sorry.
importance of kids being able to confirm the fact that they are normal, and that if they can't, then they're not normal, and it's hugely problematic. And it can, quote, start a downward inner blaming spiral, and also
That sounds awful.
causes shame. Yeah. And I was just like, well, then clearly she wrote this before we had like our entire episode on like how normal is overrated, and to embrace not being normal. Like, I'm not normal. I'm
No.
like,
Which,
there's like a really high level of conformity necessary in some of what she's written.
yeah, but we should send her a copy of Jonathan Mooney's book, Normal Sucks. That would be a nice, like, parting gift for us when we finish this one. Yeah,
Watch her head
exactly. Right.
explode.
And if you haven't listened to those, that was the second book we read, and he came on for an author visit that was like the most amazing hour ever. So head like scroll way back in our feed. If you weren't with us then, it's really good.
Mhm.
If we do say
Yeah,
so
it's
ourselves.
true. I was indifferent, sounds rude, but like I just didn't really know who he was and didn't, care that much. And he was awesome. He came on and he was actually really awesome. And I kind of ended up fangirling and
Yeah.
being really proud of the fact that we got to talk with him. So yeah, for sure, go back. All right. So now getting into starting on page 130, I guess it's really just 130, 131. She goes into the 5 love languages. And I generally like this theory. I read about it a long time ago. And, like I said, I generally like the idea of the 5 love languages. I find it generally useful. I mean, I think it's one of those things the book would like you to believe that, like it's really clear cut and all of this stuff. And as she says, it's useful. It's a good jumping off point. As long as, for me personally, you're minusing all of the God and religion stuff. Like when you actually read it, there's a lot of God in there. So maybe, I don't know, read a review on Google or something and take away. I don't know.
I thought you were going to say something like counterbalance it by reading some sort of like, like steamy smut book at the same time
A
or something
werewolf
like
smut.
that. So
You could
yeah,
do that
yeah,
too.
exactly.
I'm okay with that. And I have
Either
I
way.
have recommendations. So
Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's got that in there and she talks about, so, okay, it's not clear here, and this is some of the ambiguity. She says, and she talks about the 5 love languages, and then she says, a new one has been added, the 6th love language of feeling known. Who added that? Was it the original love language guy, or is this her, or like what happened there?
I don't think so, because I just recently got the 5 love languages for teens or parents or something like that, and it's still just the 5 love languages. And then she goes on to say, like, some people believe it and some people don't, and some people say that it's not actually a 6th love language, it's just like a great combination of the other ones, like actually doing a good job of the other love languages. So I'm not sure, but
she's like, a new one has been added, and I'm like, can I just add one too then? Like, I don't know, like a new love language is bringing me a Ben and Jerry's when you go to Walgreens. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, is that how that works?
Now I want Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah,
Damn
so
you.
I don't know, I thought that was interesting, but nothing like terribly meaningful at the same time.
So yeah, my last comment was on page 136. It's the last one in the chapter, and she just wrapped up with a quote. She says, "Therefore, a kindly reminder that you must share your thoughts and adult concerns with your partner and not with your teenager. You must separate your emotions from them. Anything else would be unreasonable to put on the shoulders of your growing adolescent." And I think that's a good quote, right? Like, our other podcast earlier this week was talking about respecting your kids. And I do think that there should be, a lot of open and honest communication with your kids. But she is talking in this chapter about when you're kind of freaking out about things, right? When you're the parent and you're freaking out about how something is going down or what might ultimately happen because of X, Y, or Z, you can't put that freak out on your teenager. You've got to make sure you keep that to yourself and share it with another adult who is not the teenager. Because again, it's kind of that idea of like their brains aren't fully developed. And you adding that in is really only going to cause way more overwhelm and meltdown than is needed, but also useful or helpful, right? Like, I think I think that we have the best of intentions, but a lot of times we forget that.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I did that even when my kids were younger, right? I mean, this is like probably one of the most extreme examples, so it's like really taking it there, but um, like when my husband was sick years and years ago, my kids were all pretty small, so it would have been, hold on, let me do some math. Liam would have been 3, so a decade ago. So my kids would have been 6, 5, and basically 3 when my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And we just made the decision not to tell the kids 99% of what went on, right? It
Mm,
was just like we kept it a secret for as long as we possibly could. He travels a lot for work, so it was pretty, he's not around as much. It makes it a little easier, right?
mhm,
And it was interesting because I wasn't sure how to do it and what to do. And I went to talk to the rabbi and I explained like what I wanted to do. And he said, okay, let's talk this through. So the logistics were going to be that my father-in-law was going to take him for chemo and stuff like that. And he goes, are your kids really close with that grandfather? And I was like, not really, no. And they said, okay, make him sick. So that was what we did. And
mm,
my husband was always driving grandpa to the hospital so it was like there was a thread of truth that ran through it, but like the
mhm,
opposite, it did get to a point after a while where we had to say something about like big germs,
mm,
and at a very like age appropriate level, but it was interesting because one of my kids came back with this like only in like the last year, like, I can't believe you lied to us that whole time. And I was like, you were 4, you were 5, you were 6, you didn't get to make that decision, right?
mhm,
Like, I'm like, we barely survived what went on with the level of stress that we were under. I mean, I look back and I'm like, I don't even know how we survived it. Like, I can't even
mm,
explain to people how intense that 2-year period was. I'm like, we weren't going to put that on you. And this kid was like annoyed with me that we didn't like fully disclose everything because that's the life
yeah,
they have now, where they
mhm,
are more looped in. I go, at 5, it wasn't appropriate. I hate to break it to you, but that was my decision to make as a parent. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, they would have been, I'm still screwed up from the experience. They would be too if we had put it on them at that time. I
mhm.
mean, it was the most stressful, awful thing I've ever been through in my life. So I'm totally for making it kid friendly or teen friendly wherever you possibly need to keep their sanity intact.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so true. And it is, health stuff is an easy one to look at, right? Like, we've talked about it before. I have a lot of health problems. And so we knew when COVID happened that if I got COVID, the chances of it making me really sick were really high. And I was really concerned about what would happen if Winston got it first and brought it home.
Hmm.
And then if the worst case scenario, if I didn't make it, right, what kind of guilt would Winston carry? Even
Yeah.
less significant than that, the day in, the living the day in, the day out, if I get it and I end up hospitalized, what kind of guilt does a kid put on themselves, even when you're trying to shield them from that? And we unfortunately we ended up in that situation. It was Winston who got it at a camp and brought it home, and really trying to navigate that. And it is hard in the moment, right? How do you figure that out? And Winston was not little, I mean, 8, so old enough to have a decent idea of what's going on, and trying to navigate, how do I get to the hospital? I need to go to the hospital for treatment, for care. And you know how much do we tell him beforehand? Do we wait and see how bad it is and what they say before we actually really clue him in on what's happening? And like, finding that balance, it's hard,
Yeah.
but it's it's worth it if you can really take a step back and remember, like, they are kids. And, there's a level of innocence there that you should protect, and
Mhm.
that you should take the time to make sure you're not putting too much adult on them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I completely agree. So I did agree with that as kind of like I had highlighted that as well. I didn't add it to my notes page because I wasn't sure that it was like meaningful when I read it. It could have just been that I was really tired of reading at that point too, though.
Yeah.
But I was like, I had noted that as well. So yeah, it's true. It is when we deal with so much and they can handle some of it, but not all of it and all that. And it just doesn't make sense for us to put too much on them.
And also, your kids came back and said, I can't believe you didn't tell us. But the reality is, we're
If
going
I
to
had
mess them
told
up
them.
somehow.
Yeah.
Well, like, we're going to mess them up somehow. You make the best choice you can. You make the best decision you can at the time.
Yeah.
And, and you just hope that you aren't messing them up in the same way your parents messed you up, right? Like,
Exactly.
we're all messed up. And if we're fixing the mess up that happened to us and creating a new one, or some other, like, you just hope that it's getting better each generation.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we went through a whole thing and I was like, no, I stand by my decision. You did not need to know that at age 5. All right. Well,
Yeah.
we ended on a really heavy note for today, but that's parenting sometimes. It happens. If you're looking for a little bit of a lighter note, come hang out with us on Facebook, right? We have a Facebook community also called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We're everywhere. And yeah, we talk homeschooling over there. We talk parenting, we talk shopping, we talk food, we talk travel, like whatever. Just come hang out with us,
Mhm.
invite a friend. It's a friendly community. Yeah, so come hang out with us. We would love to welcome you. But in the meantime, we will continue our book of raising Danish teens. I'm assuming, yeah, we probably have 2 more weeks on this book because I'm looking at how much is left. So yeah, we'll continue our discussion of raising Danish teens next week and we'll catch you then. So have an awesome week.
Yeah. Have a great one.